Matiang'i, as you can see, he's present in that conference. But for now, though, let's now talk about matters education. And both Jubilee and NASA say they will offer free secondary education if voted into office in the August 8th general election. Well, that is what they've said. Let's listen to what both President Uhuru Kenyatta has had to say on this, as well as NASA flag bearer Raila Odinga.
Sisi tumesema tukishika namna hii kuanzia Septemba watoto watasoma bure katika shule zote za sekondari, sio Januari, Septemba mwaka huu. Tamu ya mwisho watoto watalipa karo katika sekondari zetu zote.
Honorable Raila Odinga, let me inform you that when you make policy, it requires planning. Tunaelewana? Ukija kunena kitu, usinene ati ndio upigiwe makofi. Sisi wakati tulinena, tulijua ni kwa nini tunasema Januari, kwa sababu tunajua where the gaps are that we must meet in order for us to be able to offer our fellow Kenyans free secondary education.
All right, so that is what President Uhuru Kenyatta has had to say together with Raila Odinga about free secondary education, just one of the promises really they've made in the campaign rallies. So we just want to delve deeper into this and see if indeed it's tenable. Joining me right now is Amos Kaburuki. He is a Senior Programs Officer at Twaweza. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Betty, for the invitation.
All right, so you've heard there what President Uhuru Kenyatta had to say and Raila Odinga. But even before we get to free secondary education, our free primary education is not where it's supposed to be. I don't know from your point of view as an educationist, what your assessment already is about FPE.
Thank you, Betty. FPE, as we speak now, is a former shadow of its own self.
Okay.
And what the intention and the purpose of it in 2003 has failed completely. Because as we speak now, households are paying 3 times what the government is subsidizing for education.
3 times?
3 times. So on average, a parent is spending about 3,000 Kenya shillings to pay for a child attending a public school. Wow. So despite the ban on the levies that households are supposed to spend, they're still spending more. So you cannot understand, and even the CS himself has complained that we've kept on sending money for books into the schools. The books are not in the schools. We're seeing that examinations is a responsibility completely shouldered by parents. Parents are paying for what are called PTA teachers, and virtually almost every school in the country has an average of 3 teachers. So the issue of teacher shortage, the issue of the challenges around the teaching and learning materials has compelled households to keep on spending. Secondly, we also need to realize that the component of free primary education is not free education. It's supposed to be free tuition. Because there are also other costs that are attached to education in terms of realizing free and compulsory basic education. What households are spending on health, what they are spending on uniforms, what they are spending on transport, what they are spending on food to support education. So these are often costs that are always ignored. So we still go back to the 1988 recommendations of the Kamunge report, which recommended for cost sharing in education. So it is still happening. So I think that it's a fair assessment will tell you that we are overestimating when we say that free primary education has been a success. On the other hand, free primary education was supposed to ensure that all children are brought to school. Why do we still have 1 million children who are still out of school? When we come to Nairobi, 65% of education is happening in non-formal settlements where we don't have schools, there is no infrastructure. So there is the mixture of the success and the legacy that we can talk of free primary education.
Interesting view there, Amos. And I'd like us to delve deeper on something that you said, that probably should be free tuition, because the free primary education, I mean, like you said, the education comes with so many components. Like there are those fees, there's uniform, there's sometimes exercise books that parents are forced to buy. But then where is the disconnect between, is it from the Ministry of Health to the parents? Because if the Ministry of Health Education is saying that we've disbursed monies to take care of all these issues to do with examinations, then the schools still charge all this cost to the parents. So who is fooling who?
Okay, thank you, Betty. The question is not about who is fooling who, but it's a question of computing the exact cost of schooling. This is often something that we have not been able to achieve. And you need to look at the Kilemi Mwiria report of 2014, and when it was looking at the issue of affordable secondary school education, which the Jubilee government is using a lot in terms of setting the precedents for provision of free secondary education. Now, we ought to understand that capitation of 1020 was made in 2003. It was only revised in 2014 by the Jubilee government. Now, even when it's being revised to 1500, you need to look at the kind of our policy formulation process that is one blanket and one size fits it all. When you go to a school with 100 children, because we have those schools, and these are often schools in marginalized areas, schools without infrastructure, with 100 children, it means that they receive a capitation completely of 150,000 Kenya shillings. Now, you cannot run a school on 150,000 Kenya shillings.
Yes.
Now, so it therefore forces that schools have to operate. And when schools are forced to operate, they have to look for alternatives. So either one, they have to charge households for them to operate, or they leave the quality to deteriorate. That's basically what happens. So you have got schools where head teachers, in fact, the people who suffer most in this process are head teachers, because the line in between parents and the policy formulation process. If I don't do something, then these children have got nothing to eat. These children will not be able to come to school. I have visited schools where there is no infrastructure. Children are learning kwa vumbi. So definitely you wonder these children who are bathing in vumbi for the whole day, whether there's any form of meaningful education that will be taking place. So what is most critical is a question of looking at policies around affirmative and equity that will look at what are these areas where parents are struggling or schools are struggling to be able to provide a meaningful education. Because as it is right now, you throw that capitation there. In fact, it's even worse when you look at the trends as far as governments disburse money. It's only last term when schools were able to receive the last tranche of the capitation for last year. Now, it means that schools cannot even plan on such resources. So if, for instance, the school is supposed to receive, is it 1430 or something, 1,400 something for capitation per year, this money is not released at a go. Now, when this money is not released at a go, it means that schools are forced to make a lot of adjustments, because you receive, you don't know now whether to buy books, whether to pay for the watchmen, whether to pay for the cooks or what. So these are really challenges that schools go through. And this is what accounts for the poor quality in terms of public education in this country.
So talking about, let's start from the primary education. What is that thing that needs to be done?
Okay, one, we need to look at, first of all, the actual cost of making these children go to school.
And is it per school, per region? Because, you know, the costs of different things vary.
Yes, it will be important. It will be important for us to look at the differentiation in terms of the different geographical environment and context within which schools operate, because it will basically not be the same. For instance, the cost of setting up infrastructure in Nairobi will be a bit higher than the cost of setting up an infrastructure in Kakamega, for instance. The cost of food will be cheaper in Kiambu compared to the cost of food in Kwale, for instance. So we ought to have these variations when we are making the policy formulation process. But the challenge is that these decisions are made at Jogo House, and then you tell everybody that behave the same way. And I can tell you, Betty, for your information, that some of the schools that are really suffering are schools in Nairobi. Schools in Nairobi are some of the worst suffering, because if you look at a school like St. George's Primary School, this is a school which borders State House, Kilimani, and children who attend St. George's Primary School don't come from this neighborhood. These are children who come from Kibera, Kangemi, and Kawangware, for instance. Now, there's no even public means for these children to access that particular school. So this is a school with very, very unique conditions. Go to a school, for instance, CGHU, which is right on Ronalingala Street. Go to a school like Moy Avenue Primary School. These are schools in the hinterland of the city. They have got very, very few children. they cannot sustain themselves. So you have to make policy. And I can tell you that public education, because I participated in the task force that was trying to sort out the mess in public primary schools in 2014, set up by the governor for Nairobi. And I can tell you that the problem is right here in Nairobi. You need to walk to the slums of Nairobi, go to Kibera, go to Korogocho, go to Madare, and see the real problem. If you go to Mukuru, for instance, a slum with more than 60,000 people is being served by 2 public primary schools. So where will these children attend? So it follows that when we make this policy, and this is where I feel that sometimes we don't understand the concept of devolution very, very well. Because talking about devolution is not just about sending your officers to the county, but it's a question of empowering them, for them to make some of these critical decisions. That, for instance, a county like Mandera, for instance, we are giving you an allocation of 43 billion. What will work best for you? And then they will maybe say that we feel that for us capitation should be 2,300 shillings, or maybe 4,000. Maybe in Nairobi we feel capitation should be 1,200 and such. Not just making a blanket decision that everybody gets 1,400 and something on top of it.
Interesting. So we've talked about the free primary education, if it's free, if it's really not. Let's go to secondary education. And, you know, right now we're in the campaign season and all manner of announcements and declarations are being made. One is that, you know, both the president and the opposition leader have said that secondary education is going to be free. From where you sit as an education analyst, how possible is that, considering all the problems that we still have with the primary education?
Thank you, Betty. It's such a beautiful political pronouncement. And proponents of it have argued that it will help us actualize Article 43 of the Constitution, the right to free and compulsory basic education, which is pretty good. But however, the devil lies in the details. The devil lies in the details in terms of, one, what are the voters that the government is willing to take over? Number two, how do we have categorization of schools? For instance, national schools, extra county, county schools to sub-county schools. So does it mean that the government is going to take over all these costs? This is where both the president and the NASA flag bearer are not giving us such details. I had a little bit Wetangula mention of, oh, we'll take care of uniform, we'll take care of this. But you need to understand that there are certain decisions that are made. In fact, one of the things that happened in 2003 was that, I'm sorry not to mention this because my good friend, Professor Tairu, his children attended St. George's Primary School. Now, when we visited St. George's Primary School with Professor Tairu, Professor was shocked that that's how the school was looking like. Professor Karega Mutai's children actually attended the Milimani Primary School. Now, what happened in 2003 is that the middle class and people who are able to pay met at the door with the poor. While the poor were feeling that these are the good schools which we couldn't access because of fee, they were walking into them. The rich were withdrawing their children from such schools. So we have the question of, what does the government intend to deal with, particularly the influx of children in the so-called good schools? Because we know the trends in this country that parents follow up with the so-called good schools. Everybody wants their child to go to Alliance, to go to Mangu, to go to Pangani and such. So is the government going to shoulder all the costs around that? These are some of the things that the government is not coming out to be very, very specific. And information is coming out in piecemeal. You hear of this 33 billion, but you don't exactly tell how it's allocated. Yesterday, the PS mentioned of 7 billion to improve infrastructure. But it's to improve infrastructure in 2,000 schools. This country has more than 8,000 public secondary schools. So what happens in the infrastructure in the other schools? Because the intention is to transition from 72% to almost 98%, which means that you're talking about massive infrastructural development in terms of increase the classes. They're talking about increasing 1,000 laboratories. Honestly, 1,000 laboratories, you can't accommodate an additional 100,000 children, for instance. So we have to get the details of what specifically the parties are talking about. Otherwise, as it is right now, it is good political pronouncements in terms of making Kenyans hopeful that we are going to achieve the constitution. But it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of when implementation comes.
The
and
how.
come September or come January, it's going to be recipe for chaos, because it is the principals who are going to bear responsibility in terms of managing the confusion that will be there.
The same thing is almost happening in the
In what
primary-
happened in
the prim-
FPU in 2003 in January.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Amos Kaburu, for your time.
Thanks a lot, Betty.
Interesting views you have there. He's a senior programs officer at Twaweza. All right, so we are almost finishing the show this morning, but before then, let's just focus on a few other stories. And they may have escaped with their lives, but for thousands of South Sudanese girls living in refugee settlements, the conflict back home has signaled an end to childhood, forcing them to take up daily chores like fetching firewood and water, and for caring for children in the parents' absence. The United Nations says South Sudan is now the world's fastest growing